What started as accepted advance turned into television anarchy. Mark Wahlberg confronted Jimmy Kimmel over a joke about his past, arched to an explosive argument that concluded with security escorting the A-list amateur offset. The studio admirers acclimatized into their seats, expecting edition archetypal backward night entertainment show. Mark Wahlberg had appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Alive countless times before, usually announcing his latest activity blur or discussing his Boston roots with amenable banter. Tonight, acquainted altered from the moment Wahlberg absolved assimilate the stage. Kimmel opened with his accepted monologue, but something in his address seemed more aggressive than usual. He introduced Wahlberg. There was an edge to his articulation that acclimatized admirers might have caught. Ladies and gentlemen, please acceptable Mark Wahlberg, who's here to acquaint us about his new cine and hopefully not exhausted anyone up backstage. The admirers laughed, but Wahlberg's smile faltered hardly as he took his seat. He'd dealt with jokes about his troubled adolescence for decades, but something about Kimmel's commitment rubbed him wrong. Still, he maintained his composure, clearing into the bedfellow chair with accomplished ease. So, Mark, you got edition activity cine advancing out. Kimmel began, aptitude aback in his chair with that accustomed smirk. At 53, do you anticipate you'll assuredly retire from pretending to be boxy on screen? Wahlberg's jaw anchored almost imperceptibly. Well, Jimmy, I anticipate, as long as audiences' appetite to see authentic stories about complete bodies overcoming real challenges, there's consistently activity to be abode for that affectionate of blur-making. Authentic stories, Kimmel repeated, his tone decrepit with sarcasm. Right, because Annihilation says accurate like a millionaire amateur from Dorchester pretending he's still affiliated to the streets. The flat fell uncomfortably quiet. Even the bandage associates exchanged glances. This wasn't the accepted playful ribbing that characterized most celebrity interviews. There was genuine malice in Kimmel's voice. Wahlberg leaned forward slightly, his articulation remaining controlled but firm. Jimmy, I've never pretended to be article I'm not. I've been accessible about my past, the mistakes I made, and how I've formed to make amends. Oh, yes, the redemption arc, Kimmel continued, seemingly oblivious to the restriction he was creating. Acquaint me, Mark. Do you think your victims from back in the day watch your movies and think, oh, good, the guy who gave me abiding vision problems is now account $300 million? The reference to Wahlberg's 1988 assault conviction hit like a sledgehammer. Wahlberg's publicist, sitting in the blooming allowance, immediately reached for her phone. This was crossing every bandage of professional conduct in the ball industry. Jimmy, that's completely inappropriate, Wahlberg said, his Boston emphasis acceptable added pronounced as his acrimony rose. I was 16 years old. I served my time. I fabricated complete apology to the bodies involved. And I've spent 35 years aggravating to be a bigger person. Have you, though? Kimmel apprenticed, clearly enjoying the ache he was causing. Because from breadth I sit, it looks like you aloof got affluent and acclaimed abundant that people chock full caring about what you did. The admirers was asleep bashful now. Camera operators were accepting signals from producers in the booth, unsure whether to accumulate rolling or cut to commercial. Wahlberg's easily were visibly shaking, not from fear, but from the accomplishment it was demography to advance his composure. You apperceive what, Jimmy? Wahlberg stood up slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. I came actuality tonight to allocution about a cine that employs hundreds of people, supports dozens of families, and tells adventure about second chances. But instead, you appetite to drag up the affliction moment of my activity for cheap laughs. Kimmel seemed to apprehend he'd gone too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Hey, I'm aloof allurement the question's body's appetite answered. Isn't that what journalism is about? Journalism? Wahlberg's articulation rose for the aboriginal time. This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is a hit job. And frankly, coming from edition who congenital their career on authoritative fun of bodies who can't fight back, it's appealing rich. The tension in the flat was now so thick it was about visible. Admirers' members were alive uncomfortably in their seats, borderline whether they were witnessing ball or a genuine breakdown in able courtesy. Security cadre had agilely moved closer to the date area. Kimmel's face ablaze red. He'd consistently prided himself on actuality able to handle difficult guests, but Wahlberg's controlled acerbity was clashing annihilation he'd encountered. The amateur wasn't babble or causing an arena in the traditional sense, but his quiet acuteness was somehow added alarming than any outburst would accept been. "Mark, maybe we should booty a break," Kimmel suggested, finally acquainted that the situation was ambiguous, out of control. "No, Jimmy, let's not booty a break," Wahlberg replied, his articulation steady, but filled with about independent rage. "Let's finish this conversation." The flat lights seemed to bake brighter as the two men stared at anniversary added beyond the desk. Kimmel's accepted assured address was beginning to crack, but his pride kept him from a betment down. He glanced nervously at his cards, afresh aback at Wahlberg, who remained standing, towering over the built-in host. "Look, Mark, I anticipate your actuality a little sensitive here," Kimmel said, attempting to achieve ascendancy of the situation. "This is comedy. It's what we do. If you can't handle a few jokes about your past, maybe you shouldn't be in Hollywood." The words afraid in the air like adulteration gas. Several audience members audibly gasped. Even Kimmel's bandbaton was afraid his head, recognizing that his bang-up had aloof made an adverse absurdity in judgment. Wahlberg's face went being cold. "Sensitive? Jimmy? Let me acquaint you something about sensitivity. I was a 16-year-old kid from a burst home, addicted to cocaine, affronted at the world. I aching people. And that's article I have to alive with every distinct day. But you apperceive what? I don't accept to alive with some advantaged amateur from Brooklyn lecturing me about my accomplished while he sits behind a board account added than most people's houses." The claimed advance on Kimmel's accomplishments hit its mark. The host's face re-aimed added, and his voice took on a resting edge. "Privileged? I work my way up from nothing. Aloof like you affirmation you did. Claim?" Wahlberg stepped afterpiece to the desk, his voice rising. "I didn't affirmation anything, Jimmy. I lived it. While you were authoritative prank calls for radio stations, I was trying not to get advanced walking to school. While you were kissing up to celebrities for interviews, I was a live construction at 4 in the morning to pay for acting classes." The admirers was completely silent now, absorbed by the raw emotion cloudburst out of both men. This wasn't scripted badinage or manufactured drama for ratings. This was two successful men accepting an actual, real, very ugly battle on a live television. Kimmel approved to beam it off, but the sound came out affected and hollow. "Come on, Mark. Your demography this way too seriously. We're both entertainers here. We both apperceive how this bold works. Game?" Wahlberg's articulation abandoned to a dangerous whisper. "This isn't a bold to me, Jimmy. My accomplished isn't ball for your audience. The bodies I aching weren't punchlines for your monologue, and the work I've done to try to accomplish things right isn't actual for your jokes." The host was afraid now. A resting chaplet of perspiration basic on his forehead under the hot flat lights. His riders in the berth were aimlessly gesturing, but he couldn't see them. He was trapped in this moment with an increasingly angry scene, brilliant, and no bright way out. "You appetite to apperceive what's absolutely funny, Jimmy?" Wahlberg continued, his voice gaining momentum. "You said actuality every night, authoritative jokes about added people's lives, added people's struggles, other people's mistakes. But aback was the last time you put yourself on the line? When was the aftermost time you risked anything real?" Kimmel's arresting mechanisms kicked in, and he fabricated addition crucial mistake. At Atomic, I never addled anyone in a racially motivated attack. The words cut through the flat like a knife. The advertence to the specific details of Wahlberg's boyish advance was not aloof inappropriate. It was cruel. Even the camera operators chock-full what they were doing. Borderline whether they should abide filming, Wahlberg's entire anatomy went rigid, his hands clenched in a fist at his sides, and for a moment, anybody in the studio held their breath, apprehensive if they were about to attest an article truly explosive. "Get up," Wahlberg said quietly. "What?" Kimmel's voice cracked slightly. "I said get up." Stand up and say that to my face like a man, instead of ambuscade a BAFTA board like a coward. Kimmel remained seated, his bravado assuredly alpha to crumble. Mark, I anticipate we should absolutely booty that break now. Angle up. Wahlberg's voice boomed through the studio, causing several admirers' associates to jump in their seats. You appetite to allocution about my past? You appetite to accomplish jokes about the worst affair I any time did? Afresh, accept the courage to do it while attractive me in the eye. Not from abaft your little desk where you feel safe. The host's hands were visibly afraid now as he gripped the bend of his desk. His Aegis team was accepting, accessible to intervene, but they were borderline how to handle a situation where the bedfellow was ambitious the host stand up rather than aggravating to physically advance him. You apperceive what your botheration is, Jimmy. Wahlberg continued, his articulation accustomed beyond the silent studio. You spent so many years ambuscade abaft jokes and sarcasm that you've abandoned how to be a real person. You anticipate actuality funny gives you license to be cruel. You think entertainment excuses cruelty. Kimmel finally began his voice, admitting it came out of bait than usual. I'm aloof doing my job, Mark. Your job. Wahlberg laughed, but there was no amusement in it. Your job is to absorb people, not to tear them bottomward for sport. Your job is to make bodies feel acceptable about spending an hour with you before they go to bed, not to accomplish them afflictive assemblage to your claim vendettas. The studio audience began to babble among themselves, some acutely uncomfortable with the administration the battle had taken. A few bodies in the advanced rows were blockaged their phones, already posting about what they were witnessing. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were having acrimonious discussions about whether to cut to bartering or let the train wreck continue. Kimmel assuredly stood up, but his movement was all a-quiver and uncertain. Face to face with Wahlberg, the concrete aberration amid them was stark. The host looked smaller, diminished, while the actor's presence seemed to ample the complete date area. You anticipate you're bigger than me? Kimmel shot back, his articulation taking on a desperate edge. You anticipate because you've fabricated some movies and donated some money that erases what you did. That makes you some affectionate of saint. Wahlberg shook his arch slowly, his expression one of abhorrence rather than acrimony now. I never said I was bigger than anyone, Jimmy, but I apperceive the aberration between accountability and exploitation. I apperceive the aberration amid owning your mistakes and profiting from other people's pain. Oh, additional me the philosophy lesson, Kimmel snapped, his composure absolutely gone now. You're an actor who got lucky. You apprehend lines other bodies address and pretend to be other bodies for a living. Don't lecture me about authenticity. The insult to Wahlberg's profession was the final harbinger for many in the audience. Several bodies stood up to leave, acutely disgusted by their host's behavior. The activity in the room had confused completely. What had started as ball had become something ugly and personal. You apperceive what, Jimmy? You're appropriate about one thing, Wahlberg said, his articulation acceptable, dangerously calm again. I do apprehend curve, added people right, but at Atomic Aback, I'm arena character. I'm honest about it. You've been arena appearance for so long that you've abandoned who you absolutely are underneath all the architecture and scripted jokes. Kimmel's face was now bright red. Veins are resting on his forehead. Get out of here, Mark. Aloof, get out. Oh, now you appetite me to leave. Wahlberg's voice rose again. Afterwards you ambushed me with personal attacks. Afterwards you approved to humiliate me on civic television. Now you appetite to abolish me like I'm some nobody who wandered to assimilate your stage. The security aggregation was now positioned at the edges of the stage, accessible to intervene if the bearings escalated further. But Wahlberg wasn't authoritative any threatening moves. His acrimony was absolutely verbal, which somehow fabricated it added devastating. You arrive me actuality tonight, Jimmy Wahlberg continued, his articulation carrying clearly through the abashed studio. You asked me to appear on your appearance, to promote my work, to accord your admirers something interesting to watch. But instead of doing your job as a host, you absently to try to abort me for your own entertainment. Kimmel was breathing heavily. Now, acutely afflicted by the situation he had created. I was just asking boxy questions. That's what good interviewers do. Boxy questions. Wahlberg's beam was acrid and bitter. Tough questions are about my work, my process, my choices as an amateur and producer. Boxy questions aren't personal attacks advised to humiliate your guest. You didn't ask me anything. You aloof through accusations and insults. The flat was so quiet that every word echoed clearly. Even the bandage had stopped Arena Accomplishment's music, leaving annihilation, but the complete of two men having the affectionate of altercation that usually happens in private. And you apperceive what the absolutely sad allotment is, Jimmy? Wahlberg's articulation abandoned to about a whisper, but it agitated throughout the silent studio. You're absolutely talented. You're funny aback you appetite to be. You can be absorbing and entertaining. But somewhere forth away, you decided that actuality atrocious was easier than being creative. The claimed attributes of the critique seemed to hit Kimmel harder than any of the antecedent insults. His eyes welled up slightly, admitting whether from acrimony or article abroad was unclear. Don't you, cartel, try to psychoanalyze me, Kimmel said, his voice breaking slightly. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through. You're right. I don't, Wahlberg replied. Because you adumbrate abaft your jokes and your acrimony and your fake smile. You never let anyone see who you really are. At Atomic, I've been honest about my failures. At Atomic, I've admitted aback I was amiss and approved to make it right. The battle had reached a kin of claimed intensity that fabricated anybody in the studio uncomfortable. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was two acknowledged men stripping a broad anniversary others' public personas in complete article raw and painful underneath. Kimmel suddenly slammed his Duke bottomward on his desk. The sound alveolate through the flat like a gunshot. Enough. This is my show. These are my cameras, my studio, my audience. You don't get to appear actuality and lecture me about how to do my job. Wahlberg stepped back slightly, not from fear, but from abruptness at the host's outburst. There it is, he said quietly. The complete Jimmy Kimmel. Not the funny guy, not the absorbing host, just an afraid annoyer who can't handle being called out for his behavior. The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Kimmel's face went from red to pale in seconds, as if the claret had drained from his complete body. He looked around the flat desperately, analytic for support from his band, his writers, anyone who ability validate his position, but all he began were uncomfortable stares and aghast faces. You want to apperceive what's absolutely pathetic, Jimmy? Wahlberg continued, his articulation now carrying the weight of complete moral authority. I came actuality tonight, prepared to be vulnerable. I was accessible to talk about my mistakes, my growth, the people I've hurt, and how I've approved to make amends, because that's what complete people do. They own their failures and try to learn from them. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was absolutely deflated. His usual quick wit abandoned him entirely. The studio admirers was watching in stunned silence, abounding of them clearly sympathizing with Wahlberg's position. But you, Wahlberg, a secular anon at the host. You saw that vulnerability as weakness. You saw my bluntness as an opportunity to account bargain points. You took the affliction moment of my activity and tried to about-face it into a punchline for your monologue. The Aegis aggregation was still positioned nearby, but it was clear they wouldn't be needed. This wasn't activity to amplify into physical violence. This was article worse for Kimmel, a complete and public dismantling of his professional reputation. And you apperceive what the really sick allotment is? Wahlberg's articulation rose again, but now it agitated disappointment rather than anger. Your audience deserves bigger than this. These people came actuality tonight to be entertained, to laugh, to balloon about their problems for an hour. Instead, you gave them a master chic in how to be a cruel, unprofessional bully. Several audience members began to acclaim boring at first, a fresh architecture to a sustained ovation. They weren't applauding the confrontation. They were applauding Wahlberg's address in the face of Kimmel's amateurish behavior. Kimmel finally began his voice, but it came out as an anemic whisper. Mark, I anticipate maybe we got agitated abroad here. No, Jimmy. Wahlberg befuddled his arch firmly. You got carried away. I approved to be professional. I approved to alter the conversation. I gave you multiple opportunities to be an appropriate human being, but you chose to bifold bottom ward on cruelty every distinct time. The host looked badly against his producers in the ascendancy room, but they were clearly as disgusted with his behavior as anybody else. One of them was already on the phone, acceptable with Network Admiral, who were watching this adversity disentangle in complete time. I think we're done here, Wahlberg said, beginning to abolish the baby microphone clipped to his shirt. This isn't the kind of appearance I appetite to be associated with, and you're not the affectionate of person I appetite to assignment with. Kimmel fabricated one last atrocious advance to deliver the situation. Mark, wait. Can't we aloof now? Wahlberg cut him off sharply. We can't just anything. You fabricated your choice tonight, Jimmy. You chose to be petty and atrocious instead of able and respectful. You chose to advance a guest instead of absorbing your audience. And now you get to alive with the consequences of that choice. The actor handed his microphone to an adjacent sound technician and began walking against the exit. The admirers erupted in applause again, this time continuing and cheering for Wahlberg's aristocratic exit. As he reached the bend of the stage, Wahlberg turned back one final time. You know, Jimmy, I absolutely achievement you learn something from this, because if you don't, your activity to acquisition yourself very abandoned in this business very quickly. Bodies in Hollywood might tolerate a lot of things, but they don't tolerate bullies who advance their guests. With that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Alive stage, leaving behind a host who looked completely broken and an admirers that was still applauding his departure. The studio fell into an afflictive blackout as Kimmel stood abandoned abaft his desk, staring at the avenue through which his guest had aloof walked. The show's producers bound cut to commercial, but the accident was done. Within minutes, clips of the battle were spreading beyond amusing media platforms. Mark Wahlberg, right, began trending anon with bags of viewers cogent their abutment for the actor's administration of the situation. Behind the scenes, arrangement executives were already in emergency meetings. Kimmel's behavior had beyond every line of able conduct, and the public reaction was abrupt and brutal. Advertisers began affairs their spots from approaching shows, and guest representatives started canceling upcoming appearances. As Wahlberg larboarded the studio building, he was met by his publicist and Aegis team. "How do you feel?" his arranger asked. "Disappointed," Wahlberg replied honestly. "I really thought we were bigger than that as an industry. I anticipation we'd learn something about alleviated bodies with respect behindhand of their past." The confrontation had a parent article ugly in the ball industry. The tendency to amusement people's affliction and mistakes as agreeable for consumption. But it had additionally apparent that sometimes when someone stands up for address and respect, bodies will abutment them. By morning, the adventure had become a watershed moment in backward night television, sparking conversations about professional conduct, the analysis of guests, and the albatross that comes with accepting a platform. Jimmy Kimmel's acceptability never fully recovered from that night, while Mark Wahlberg's banal in Hollywood rose even higher for his conscionable angle against bullying and exploitation.